Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maasros Perek Dalid, Halacha Gimel, and Halacha Dalid. We're learning today Daf Lamed Vav, and we left off on Daf Lamed Vav, Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top of the Amud. So the Mishnah in Halacha Gimel was speaking about what are the amounts of kernels, whether from barley or from wheat, that one, by sifting them manually, will allow for that eating to be classified as achilas aray, thus permitting a person to snack from it, and what amount of even manually sifting kernels of barley or of wheat will Chazal say, will we objectively say, that amount, eating it in that manner will be defined as a achilas keva, as formal eating, and even though these kernels b'chlal did not even undergo gemar melacha, forget about the shisha devarim, echad mishisha devarim. Nevertheless, as we keep on learning, that what we consider to be a formal act of consumption may not happen, may not be done prior to the tithing. Okay, now the Mishnah, when we spoke about kernels of wheat, said that if the person who was first removing the chaff with one's hands, and then they're sifting out the klipa from the kernels, the words of the Mishnah are al yad, al yad. In other words, you're throwing it from one hand into the other, back and forth, and that will somehow get rid of all of the chaff, or almost all of the chaff. As long as you are doing it in one go, it's one handful, then that eating later will be called achilas aray. If a person, however, does the al yad, and they put it on their lap, and then they take another amount of wheat and they do it again, so now they're gathering more than one handful, that amount will be considered achilas keva. Now, even when a person is doing it al yad, it's not clear as to how much can you consume. What will happen if a person somehow has a technique which will allow them to go through many kernels at one time? See, by the barley, it's amazing. The Mishnah spoke about only eating one barley. Then the Brisa says, okay, 2 barleys, but not 3 barleys. Here we're speaking about having a whole handful. So one might have thought that there is an upper limit in which we say that even if you did it al yad, it's too much. But the Gemara, that's where we left off yesterday, was insisting on quoting a story in the top of Daf Lamed Vav from Rabbi Lazar, where there is no upper limit. So if someone has a technique through which they are able to mamish gather a lot of wheat kernels at one time and get rid of the chaff, all of that will still be allowed to be snacked from. That is where we left off. And on 3 lines from the top, we're going to begin today by quoting a brisa which will prove this opinion that as long as you're doing it al yad, there isn't an upper limit for which we say, you did too much. We won't say that. Another big thing that we will have in the Gemara before Halacha Dalid is that, as we learned yesterday and previously, that we differentiate between a person removing something from items that are not yet nigmar malachton and then being allowed to snack from it when they are able to put it back if they make that choice, versus other scenarios where once it's removed to be consumed for whatever reason, the person will not put it back. When you won't put it back, that makes your removal from that pile at sometimes to be viewed as the varim that, yes, nigmar malachton, because you plan to eat them, which will create a problem in whatever setting. We're going to have that same concept applied to the dinim of our Mishnah, which is a huge chiddush of the Gemara, as we'll see inside. Now, Halacha Dalid will be mamash be fascinating. The Mishnah says, hafachba v'hafachba d'choilba. B'chlal, for people, I'm talking to myself that are learning this, it's so exciting. We're learning new dinim, new concepts, new applications. We're going to be learning the following. Number 1, that only the plant's fruit, listen to these words, either we're going to use the word peri or even the word oichel, only the part of the plant that is halachically defined as its fruits are subject to meiser. Other parts of a plant, and we're going to be going into specific plants, even if they are edible, if halachically they are not defined as its plant's fruit, they are b'chlal not subject to meiser. That means I can eat them freely. Okay, so how do we define the fruit of a plant? So the rule and the exception. The rule is, it has to do with your intent. And we're going to be going through various plants in the Mishnah as the rule, in which the plant has a seed that people used to make that into edible. By the way, these seeds could be edible only because they would grind them up. Doesn't matter how you made them edible. So if your intention of planting, your intention, the owner of planting this plant was for its seeds, that as the rule will make its seeds be defined as its fruits. And even if the greens of that plant is edible and you will eat it, you b'chlal don't have to tithe it because you planted it primarily for its seeds. Now, of course, if you planted it for both, then both parts have to be tithed. So that is the rule. Again, the rule is that your intention, your machshava, for which you planted this item will define what part of the plant is fruit and what part is not. What part of the plant has to be tithed and what part of the plant does not need to be tithed, not even rabbinically. That's the rule. And then we have exceptions. Exceptions meaning, and that will be the Mishnah. We're going to go through item by item. We're going to go through coriander. We're going to go through dill, all these vegetables that without a picture from Kevan, who's not here yet, you won't even know what we're talking about, or I won't know what we're talking. Doesn't matter. The Torah is the same Torah. Is that the Torah will say that either all of the parts are automatically defined as its fruit, or other such halachas, and that will be halacha Dalit. And with that, we're going to have an opportunity in the Gemara to go through two things, and I'll say this now, Bekitzir, and then we're going to get into it. First of all, there are two topics that are relevant when it comes to tithing. One should not be confused with the other. Number one, every year has to have its products tithed for itself. We don't tithe items from one year together with another. More than that, on top of that, together with that, through the cycle of the 7 years, as we know, there is a big difference as to what maasros must be given. Year number one, year number two, Truma Gedola is the same always. Maaser Rishon is the same always. But then what? Year one, year two, from the 7 years of cycle of Shemitah, Maaser Sheni. Year three, Maaser Ani. 4 and 5, Maaser Sheni. Year 6, Maaser Ani. Okay, what happens if something was planted at the end of the third, but you harvested it on the fourth? The end of the second, you harvested on the third. So let me just review certain rules. When it comes to legumes, to kitniyos, it has to do with hashrasha, which happens earlier. Sometimes we even say it has to do with when you planted it. It just happens to be that from when you planted it until hashrasha, really it's a big machlokes tanoim, how much time it takes. Some people say it only takes 3 days. It's not a machlokes mitzias. It's how much of it's taking root is halachically going to be considered it took root. When it comes to vegetables, the rule, basar likitosoi isuroi. It has to do with when you harvested it. That will be connected to our topic because we're learning about plants that have seeds, that have greens. We're going to see that at times, even when both parts have to be tithed because they are both considered its peiros, lav dafke, we're gonna make the determinant of the year the same. There'll be times where you're going to say, the seeds are more like legumes. The seeds have to be tithed. But how do you count the year? Basar, hashrasha. The greens should be like a vegetable. Other times we're going to say, what are you talking about? It's one plant. If both parts have to be tithed, so we don't know how to do that. But it's going to have to be one determinant. Now there's another issue, and I'll leave with that. And when we hear this, never confuse one with the other. There's something called oinas hamaasros. Oinas hamaasros generally means that prior to a product reaching its third, I know we learned this, it's not always a third, but let's go to the general. By grains, vaday a third. Many Rishonim say that the other shiurim by the others have to do with the third. Or it has to do with when its seed is strong enough that you can replant it. Let's go basar shlish. When I have an item that is not even a third of its full size, that item b'chlal is not called oichel yet. It b'chlal doesn't have to be tithed. Versus once the item reached the third, even though most people would have left it in the ground longer, but if you harvested it early, at least it reached its oinas hamaasros, you'll be chayiv to tithe it. So the oinas hamaasros topic versus the determinant. What year are we in? After hashrasha, after this, after that, after the gathering. These are two separate topics, but we'll see today how they're going to relate one with the other. And all coming back to this general concept, only fruits have to be tithed. Generally, the definition of fruits is personal. What was your intention when you planted it? Some people plant the same thing for its greens. Then the greens are the fruits. The seeds don't have to be tithed. Other people planted for the seeds, not for the greens. And then, again, many exceptions in the Mishnah. Coming back, let's hit it inside. Daf Lamed Vav, 3 lines from the top. The Mishnah gave the shear by chitim, yad, al yad, al yad. The Gemara tells us a story, which is a fascinating story. Why did Rabbi Lazar not want to show his 2 Talmidim how he was doing what he was doing? None of the Noisei Kalim know. It was just fascinating. But what he wanted to show them is that he managed in one al yad to get rid of the chaff of many, many wheat kernels, much more than other people, and he allowed himself to snack from it. In other words, the shear of the Mishnah doesn't have an upper limit. And the Gemara says, V'tane kain, that's where we're up to. And so, could we infer from a Braisa? Doesn't matter how much. Only matters if you gathered one handful, you put it on your lap, and then you did it again. Now it's already called achilas keva. So the Braisa here is also speaking about wheat, kernels of wheat. Ubilvad, and the Braisa says, al yad, and you can eat it. Now, there were other ways that people who wanted to snack on wheat kernels would get rid of the chaff. One way would be by, after rubbing with your hands, breaking the klipa away from the kernel. So it's loose, but it's still there. You have to separate them. How would they do that? They would put it through a funnel. And they would put it through a funnel. The funnel has one end wide. They would put this mixture in the wide end, and they would allow it to roll through the funnel. And, there's a gravity. The kernels are heavier. And it was harder to make it through the small end. And that would be one way of the chaff would remain above, and what would go through the hole at the end would only be the kernels. Another common way that people used to manually take out the klipa, the chaff, from the kernel was by putting it into a tamchoy. A tamchoy here, Pashut, means a large platter. So you would put it on one end of the platter, and you wouldn't tilt the platter very aggressively. Then everything would roll down. But if you get the right angle, so slowly, only the heavier moves, the kernels, and the klipa, it's not tilted enough for the klipa to move. When you make that boited through a koinen or through a tamchoy, you are able to do a boited in a large amount. So the Braisa says, even though you can do it, and you can eat them, it's called achilas aray. Don't do it with a utensil. Now, what's the raya from this Braisa? Before we read the next one-liner, that's a whole machlikas, what that means. Look inside the Marafulda, 7 lines from the top. Tamchoy was the ka'ara gedoyla. V'chol she'oisa al yidei kelim halolu harebehu. You are able to sift a lot at a time. So now explains the Marafulda, what the Gemara is proving, inferring from the Braisa, that mashma, as long as you don't use a utensil, even if you're going to end up with the same large amount, afilu harbe, like the Amoyre Rabbi Lazar, that had some sort of technique that he managed to do a lot at a time, that's going to be mutter. Now, the Marafulda, I'm going to give you a heads up. There's a big problem with all of this. How can it be that the discrepancy between barley and wheat is so big? Bishleim, according to the Rishonim that we quoted yesterday, that they teach that by the barley, one means 1 ear. Even there, 1 ear, let's say, has 20 kernels. When Rabbi Lazar had mistama 100 kernels. Kolchchein, if you're going to learn pshat in the Mishnah that by barley, it's 1 kernel at a time. And then the Braisa says, no, it can even be 2. How can it be that by barley you can do only 1 and 2, and by wheat you can do this large amount? So the Marafulda is giving you a heads up that there's another detail that the Mishnah, for whatever reason, didn't write explicitly, but we will be enlightened to, and that is that when are you allowed to do a large amount? Only when you are doing it near the goyden. What's the logic? Because even though you removed it, if you won't snack on it, you're going to put it back in the pile. And that in itself allows for what you have in your hand to be considered a davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi. It makes it considered, therefore, it's eating achilas aray. And the same thing would be with barley. So you can really do a larger amount of barley if you are near the goyden. where the Mishnah says that by barley you can only do 1-1 or 2-2, be'emes, if I'm doing the same thing with wheat, but far away from the goyden, then I'm also only allowed to do a much smaller amount. So that's what the Marafulda already introduces. But let's come back. Let's, even with that, even 2 and 2 means the whole thing. Even by chitin, the way the understanding over here is that what Rabbi Elazar did was so much. So, okay, first of all, the fact that the Braisa emphasizes the problem is a keli is mashma. The problem is a keli, not the quantity that you do in the keli. Even though you can challenge that, but that's one understanding. And now, abam ule'inyan Shabbos ad kigrei. So what are we talking about? Ule'inyan Shabbos ad kigrei. So the Pnei Moshe, 10 lines from the top, does the easy way out. The easy way out, something else completely. That Chavra just hashgacha pratis. Look at that. Today we're beginning Hilchas Shabbos. Today is Chav Beis, Adar, Pevav, right? Rambam. I mean, today we're going from Ahava into Zmanim. So when it comes to the shear of Hoitzah, there is a minimum amount. Less than that, you didn't carry anything. What's the shear generally by food? Kigrei geres. So that will be the pshat. No, it's when it comes to the chiyuv of maisres, al yad, al yad. I don't care how much you fill up. When it comes to Shabbos, there's a much lesser share, kigrei geres. The Marafulda is not happy with that. So he's saying the following, that we're speaking about, this is a big chiddush. We're speaking about the isur of boirer on Shabbos. Am I allowed to sift on Shabbos? Al yad, al yad. Normally we say boirer is asur. But don't forget, guys, remember, what's the big rule by boirer? Ayol. Oichel matech pseilis, yad not keli, and la'alter. So the Braisa is saying, in Shabbos, I am allowed to sift it up until I kroigeres. And I'll tell you more than that. I understand, Shlomo, that not only is the sifting permitted if it's less than a kroigeres, but what about the breaking of the shaft from the kernel? That will be dush. That will be that's tulda the dush. That's a rabbinic. That will be allowed. No. Breaking is dush, and then the al yad is sifting. So the Braisa is saying a chiddush, according to the Marafulda, that on Shabbos, if I'm doing less than a gregeres, I'm allowed to do it. It's considered something so arai, it's considered something so informal that it's not considered a chilul Shabbos. We are amazing. B'chlal, when it comes to any activity that you do it in an indirect manner, b'chlal, anything that's done in an unusual way downgrades the isur from a biblical to a rabbinical. To begin with, this type of dash is only midrabanan, and you're doing such a small amount, it's going to be mutter. Anyway, that's a chiddush of the Marafulda. The Pnei Moshe clearly argues with that. He's going to hold that none of it is mutter. Gregeres is only when it comes to the inyan of carrying. Okay, adkan. So as we just spoke out, this Marafulda, the v'hatama farish b'sarach the ma'irish usamach legoiden. The problem is Rab Chia bar Ada asked in front of Rav Mana, I don't understand, how is there such a huge difference between barley and wheat? Hocha atamar, by barley you say that what b'soidim, and to make the question as small as he could, he's not even quoting the Mishnah. The Mishnah only allowed you to do 1 at a time. The said 2 at a time. We said yesterday because it's whatever's common practice. Shtayim potter, only shalish chayiv, but shalish chayiv. And Shlomo, even according to the Rishonim that say shalish means not 3 kernels, it means 3 ears. 3 ears, I'm not a big maven, is much less than the shear of Rabbi Elazar. Much less. Here you're telling me that as long as you're doing it in one go, doesn't matter how much you can do. It's got to be that Adai and Keva has to do with quantity. That's basically the Gemara's question. There has to be some time. You know, you're making a mezainis on pizza, and how many pizzas can you eat? At some point, you're having a seuda. Even bagels. Many people don't make mezainis bagels because of this, because you're having a meal. There is a quantity aspect. You can't say, I'm eating. It's not a meal. It is a meal. That's your lunch. How is it not a meal? So Amalei, so here comes a huge chiddush. That Shani hi hachi. The only reason why we are allowing for this larger amount to still be eaten, because we're considering it arai, is only when you are doing it. I'm adding the words of the Manafulda. You are doing this near the pile. You are doing it in the field. Story of Rabbi Lazar was in the field. Since you're doing it in the field, there's always the possibility that you'll, when you snack, that's the whole word. I don't want to eat a meal. When I don't want to eat a meal, I just need to eat something I'm chalashing. That's Yiddish. An excuse for a snacking. Okay, so you had a little bit. I'm not fainting anymore. I'll put it back. It's the fact that you'll put it back, that in itself makes your amount not count to be such a big amount, because lav dafka, you're going to finish all of it. In other words, in the barley, it's because you're doing it far away from the garden. And indeed, the Tana came. Now, this is such a big chiddush that for an amoida to make it, it was too much. But they found the braisa that bamed varam amurim. When do we, now this bamed varam amurim goes on the barley. When do we say that shalosh is already asur? And especially according to the Rishonim, that shalosh means 3 kernels. I can't even do 3 kernels. Come on, 3 kernels. That's only bisman she'ena samach lagoyden. Avol im hoyu samach lagoyden beferish. Afilu yoiser mikamuter. Why? Beferish. That's what we keep on learning. Now, how much yoiser mikan? L'choyre, the Gemara is saying yad al yad. Yad al yad, same concept. Gewaldig. Okay. Now we're starting this new topic. And I don't think you're going to get us. Only in Shabbos. It's yad al yad. That's what we learned. And that's the whole point. We don't say that more than that is usher. No. If it's in one handful, even if you can manage to fill up your whole hand, then you have big hands. Okay. So we gave this rule. It's a new rule now. Only the halachic fruit part of a plant has to be tithed. Many plants have in them parts. We're going to learn about plants that halachically we divide them into stems, greens, and seeds. We're talking about vegetables. The rule is, which part has to be tithed? What was your intention when you planted it? The power of intent. And therefore, it's going to be subjective. Only the part for which I planted it for is subject to tithing. The exception will be that there are certain plants, as the Mishnah will enumerate, where the Torah objectively says all of its parts are considered fruit. I don't care what you had in mind. We will also be learning about scenarios where you changed your mind. How will that affect it? When we need your intention, but then you change your intention. Let's hit it. So the first, it's item by item by item by item. First item is kaven is here. Kaven was here. Is kuzbar, coriander. Coriander, my friends, not that I would know, I don't know, but I know from the Mishnah, has 2 parts. There is the leafy green part, and there are the seeds. Some people planted it. Now, the leafy part is ready as a rule before the seeds. They needed to wait until the seeds got hardened. You would harvest it for its seeds. You would grind up the seeds, and you would have a herb.
Cilantro.
Huh?
Cilantro.
Could be cilantro. I'm saying words that
It's the herb
of coriander. There we go. Shkoyach. So kuzbar. Here the Mishnah says like this. Listen to this. If you planted it with the intent of using its zera, if you planted it for its seeds, even though its leaves or its greens are edible, even if you end up eating its leaves, since when you planted it for its seed, that's the whole word. That's the beginning of the Mishnah. Yarko potter. The leafy green part of the vegetable will never be subject to mices. Gavaldik. However, what about on the opposite? Now, the rule would be whatever your intention was, not so by coriander. By coriander, if you taka had in mind the seed, okay, then we follow the rule. But if you only had in mind yerek, you only had in mind for the leaves, you did not want to use its seeds, since the seed part of the kuzban is objectively, Torah-wise, considered so primary, your intention can never exclude the seeds from having the obligation for being tithed. What your intention accomplished is now you have to tithe both. That's an exception. The normal rule in many, many other plants, if you had in mind only for the greens, only the greens have to be tithed. By kuzbar, we say, you're right. If you had in mind for the seed, then only the seed and yarko pater. But if zarali yerek, both, then misaser, both the zera and the yerek. chiddush, we will always consider the seeds as a primary fruit of this plant, and your intention helped. It also upgraded the leaves, the greens, as the fruit of this plant. Rabbi
Why
Eliezer,
is kusbar different than all others?
L'man nishtana, l'chaim, I have no idea. I'm happy I even know the word in English. He already knows what it is.
Me too. Kusbara.
No, 1 second. In other words, we're learning when God created the world, what did he create this for? What was God, everything can be used for many things. Why did God create me as a Yid? To keep Torah and mitzvahs. That's the ikar. I can have all my other intentions, that purpose will always remain. And if I add another kavanah, then I'm adding. But I can't.
Right, but that logic can go to all herbs and
But that's
seeds.
the whole point, that by other things, God left it neutral.
So some things are subjective and some are objective and subjective.
Yes, Danny. That's why I love this. We're learning these new things. Who knows this? You know what? The Rosh always says, Yakir, there is the what and the why. Before you go into the why, you have to first get the what. We're learning new things. Did anyone here know this? Let's learn. We need time to absorb what the Torah says. Then we can go into the why. Now, Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, we're moving on to another topic, dill. Yeah, people have traumatized with dill in the soup, but we'll leave the trauma out of the Mishnah over here. Huh? You love it. Oh my God, I can't take it. But that doesn't matter. Let's go to the Mishnah. Now, dill has three, let me just tell you how dill itself has 3 stages of growth, physically. First, it's a vegetable. And I want to tell you something. Many people plant it. They don't have to wait that long. If all they want is the leaf, the green, they harvest it earlier on for the leaf. If you wait longer, it's going to develop shoots, stems, harden. Some people plant it for the stem, and they plan to harvest it when it becomes a stem. Then in the stem, the seeds begin to develop, and if you leave it long enough, then people will harvest it for the seeds. So there are 3 purposes for which you can plant the dill. The Mishnah says that Sheves, that Rabbi Eliezer says, Mis Aseres, you know what needs to be tithed? All 3 parts. In other words, dill is an exception. I don't care what your intention is. I might have planted it only for the greens. But if I left it longer and now it has stems, or even more, and now it has seeds, I got to tithe all parts of it. It doesn't fit the rule. Hasheves misaseres, all 3 parts. The zera, the yerek, and the zidim are the stems. No. Einoi misaser zera v'yerek. That no species is objectively subject to both. No species. All species, even the coriander and even the dill, it has to do only with your intent, but there are 2 exceptions. But according to the Chachamim, the 2 exceptions are shachalayim, cress. I don't even know what a cress is. And garger, garden rocket. For sure don't know what that is. These are the 2 that both the greens and the seeds of shachalayim and garger, both directions. Means even if someone planted the shachalayim only for the greens, doesn't matter. The greens and the vegetables have to be tithed. Only for the greens. The greens and the seeds have to be tithed. That's very important. No, l'chachamim. We're gonna see a lot more in this chachamim, God willing, tomorrow. A lot more. In other words, it sounds from our Mishnah. Let me give a little heads up that l'chachamim, since they make the exception by shachalayim and garger, so your intention is irrelevant, because no matter what, you got to tithe both the seeds and the vegetables. It's not accurate. This statement won't be accurate. Your intention will be effective. Nevertheless, it's going to work. What the Chachamim are saying, that both the seeds and the vegetable, the greens, have to be tithed. Leave the statement. You'll understand exactly what this means, God willing, tomorrow. Let's keep on going. We're in the Mishnah. We're just going to Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Now, Rab Gamliel Oimer, tomorrow shall kill son, many plants have tamaris. Now, normally tamar means a date. What we are referring to here, according to most Rishonim, is that we're speaking about buds. These plants begin to develop seeds, but the way they develop is that there is a bud that develops into a pod into which seeds develop. If someone were to harvest it earlier on, they would have these tamaris. They would have these buds. They are edible. So Rav Gamliel says that buds, where's Kavan? Hello, we need a picture of that. Of all of the following, of tilson, of fenugreek, there's so much fenugreek gewalt in the Mishnah. Chardel mustard, pul halav and white beans, all of them are chayavin b'maiser. In other words, they have a objective significance. They are considered food, even if you planted it for its seed. One who planted these items for its seed, because fenugreek, all of these things, you need the seed. You grind the seeds. You would not harvest the buds. You're ruining it. But if someone ended up harvesting it, and you want to eat it because it's edible, you have to be ma'asid it. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, tzlaf. Now, for those of us who learn Masechtas Brachas, right, in Hilchas Brachas, if you remember that tzlaf, the caper bush, has so many parts. Remember that? The berries. Oh, so we at least I'm familiar with the tzlaf plant from the Mishnah. I probably never met a tzlaf plant, and if I met it, I didn't know it's it. But in the Mishnah, we're learning it. So here we're speaking about maisres. So what tzlaf, says the Mishnah, misasid, what parts of it requires tithing? Both its buds and its aviyoinois, its berries. I remember Rabbi Mendel, the berries, and the kafres, its husks. All of these parts, again, according to Rabbi Gamliel, are considered food, even the husks. Whatever your intention is. No, there is a objective purpose for these plants. Lo oichel. Rabbi Akiva Oimer, I disagree with that. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with that. And he holds, when it comes to this caper bush, einoi misaser eli aviyoinois, the only part that by default will be considered its fruits will be its berries. That is the one, mipnei pedi, finally we have the word in the Mishnah. The pedi has to be tithed. The other parts don't have to be tithed. But let me add to Rabbi Akiva. Unless when you planted the caper bush, you specifically had in mind for the husks. In other words, Rabbi Akiva is not taking away your koyach of adding. But there is a default. So there's a machlokes, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, when it comes to the tzlaf. Amazing. I didn't have time yesterday, but to look at
and only capers.
What was that?
Is it only capers, or is it general machlokes across all these different?
No, only
items?
they only argue by the caper bush. What will they hold regarding Tumari Shel Tilson? I have no idea. They did not opine. The Chayre Rab Gamliel means only Rab Gamliel is of that opinion. And other ones will say that Tilson and Chardel and Pulalovin, my understanding is it follows the rule. The rule is, why did you plant it? And if I did not plant it for its buds, I'm going to the fenugreek, because it is planted for its seeds. Then if you said, I'm going to harvest it buds, I'm going to take a few buds, according to everyone else, I think you don't have to tithe it.
So Eliezer says, even if you only planted it for the berries, you still have to tithe the buds and the husks or whatever.
Exactly. Yes, that's the whole point. Okay, let's dive into it. So the first thing the Mishnah spoke about was kuzbar, was coriander. I just want to review the words. And the Mishnah says that kuzbar, remember that, shezara lezera, what did the Mishnah say, Shlomo? Halkom. If you planted it for its seed, then the Mishnah says, yarko potter. That was the opening line of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Chizkiya Aman, that kiven shelokat mimenu shtayim shalosh moidoyois. So let me go. A guy planted the coriander for its seeds. For people who do that, they won't harvest its greens. They won't do that. What happens if I did it? Not once. Now, when it says 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3, is it 2 or is it 3? That's a general kash. But if I not only changed my mind, which will not be enough, you know what? After I planted it, I'm also going to have the greens. If I actually did a maaseh, that is showing that I changed my mind. What was my action? That I'm beginning to harvest its greens. So the Chizkiah says, once I harvest from this plant that I planted Lizera, not once, 2 or 3 times, the greens, now, my action will change its designation, will change its intent. What will its intent be right now? For both. And when it's for both, then both have to be tithed. Gavaldik. Says Chizkiah, I'll go more than that. Even if you planted the coriander for its greens, and what did the Mishnah say? Zara liyerek, look inside Amud Aleph, misaser zera v'yerek. Remember, by coriander, you wanted to know why, but before what? That even if I only planted it for its greens, Zara, liyerek, misaser, zera, v'yerek, both have to be tithed. What happens if for 2 or 3 times, when the leaf was ready, I did not pick it? Shemana mimenu. So I'm making a demonstration, but through a non-action. But it's also a demonstration because since when I planted it, the intention was for its greens. So harvest it. But I'm not harvesting it. And then in the next season or next time around, or another leaf came up in the same season, however this works, again, I did not harvest it. Again, I'm demonstrating a change of purpose through a non-action. That also is effective. Gavaldik, how great is that? No, it's now what am I showing? That what do I want it for? For its seeds. Because if I would want it for its greens, I would harvest it. Okay, so now it's as if I planted it lechatchila for its zera, and the din is that yarko potter. So from now forward, if someone happens to take off a green, they don't have to tithe it. So first of all, a beautiful concept. First of all, you can change its purpose, not through just a change of thought, but you have to have an action. Number 2, that a lack of action sometimes halachically is considered an action. What do they say? Silence is acquiescence. You're showing that you changed your intent. Because if you plant it, why are you not taking the leaf? There's a leaf here.
One time is not enough.
One time is not enough. It has to be shtayim shalosh. Where does it say? I think there's.
Does that mean 2 or 3 years, like different years, or is it just like
I think
came up and I ignored it?
It's not a tree. There is no health insurance residual over here. It's a Boida Pri Hadama. But I do think is that when you plant a seed, one leaf grows, then another leaf grows, and then another leaf grows. And if you only would have used it for its leaves, every time a leaf would come out, you would make a Hadama and you would eat it. You're leaving it for it to turn on it somehow, for it to develop all the way to the seed part. Okay. Says the Gemara, let's go with Abraisa, Zara, Lizera, let's go back, continuing with the coriander. If I planted the coriander for its seeds, again, what did we say? Yarko Potter. The veggie doesn't have to be tithed. What has to be tithed? The seed. Now let's go back to what our words of intro. Now we're going into the other topic. What year will this be part of? This has seeds, this has greens. Generally, seeds fall into the category of kitnius. Kitnius is determinant of what year does it belong to, has to do with when it took root, which is earlier on. The vegetables generally are tithed in the year that they were harvested. Let's speak about a coriander that you planted it at the end, of year 2, but it's ready to be harvested in year number 3. Meiser Sheni, Meiser Oni. So the Braisa begins from the easy to the complicated. The easy will be when you plant it only for its seed. So the Yerek B'chlal doesn't have to be tithed. So here it's easy. So how do you define this? As a kitnius. Because it's only a seed. So Zara Lezera, one of the expressions that we have throughout, sometimes the Mishnah says Basar Hashrasha. But another way of doing it is that, again, I give you an example. You planted it at the 2nd year, but it's ready to be harvested in the 3rd year. By kitnius, it goes misaser lisha avar. That's the same thing. And that's easy. Why? Because the greens are irrelevant. You don't even have to tithe them. But here, now it's going to get fun. What happens if Zara liyerek, and what did the Mishnah say? That even if, by coriander, even if you had in mind only the vegetables, What did the Mishnah say by coriander? Both have to be tithed. Because by coriander, the seed is, the Torah says it's a primary part of the plant. You can add, but you can't take away the seed part. Okay, now I got a problem. What do I do now? So says the Mishnah, this is amazing. Misaser labom, misaser lamom. Even though the seeds have to be harvested, this is beautiful. You can't ignore the seeds. But since you only planted it for its leaves, your machshava did do something for everything. That the determinant will be, this is a vegetable. This vegetable happens to have seeds. The seeds have to be tithed. But all of it is called a vegetable when it comes to the determinant of the year. I love this. Now what happens if you had in mind both? Now it gets even better. We're going, you see, menachal alakovet. Now, zera lezera uliyerek. Or, let's go back to what we just learned. You had in mind one, but then you changed your intention. You added. Or shezara lezera. At that point, it's only yarko potter. But then we said, this is the brayso. In other words, 2 or 3 times passed, and you also harvested the greens. So now it's both. In other words, whichever way, either initially both, or you changed your intention by adding, so now it's both. So the Braysi says, let me tell you why you do it. Both parts have to be tithed, but each one has another determinant. Misaser, mizara. I take back every word I just said. I got ahead of myself. So here the Braysi says, misaser, mizara al yarko umiyarka al zara. The entire plant, number one, will be considered to be one species. Before we get to the year, which we're gonna say in a moment, since you had in mind both, we will always consider this to be one species. I have to give 2% for truma. Don't think that you have to give 2% from the seeds and 2% from the leaves. You still view it as one plant, and from its total, you take off 2%. Whether all of the 2% is from the seeds, whether all of the 2% is from the leaves, since you had in mind both, they are considered to be one payder. You don't have to take off, it's always going to be the same amount, but you don't have to proportion it from the seeds for the seeds and the leaves for the leaves. Now 1 second. What year do you do it? So he says, as will come out. See, the Brayso didn't say that. And we define the entire plant as, what would you think? What is the Mishnah telling you? That coriander has an objective chashivus for its seeds. So even though now you have to tithe from its leaves, it's considered one plant, and objectively it's called zera. So the determinant is lisha avar, or we can say sometimes last Rosh. Now 1 second, now it's going to get real fun. Says the Brayso, this is all the Brayso. It's like it says, if you harvested it before Rosh Hashanah. We're trying to say that everything follows the seed. So he says, you know what it means lifnei Rosh Hashanah? The likita. When do we care about the likita? Only by vegetables. So he's saying that if the hashrasha took place before Rosh Hashanah, and the vegetables took place before Rosh Hashanah, and shalaket mimenu shloim, it doesn't have to mean all of it. Then there's no chiddush. That you harvested at least some before Rosh Hashanah, then we're going to say that we always say the ikir is the zera regarding the determinant. But if lakat mimenu la'achar Rosh Hashanah, but if none of it was harvested before Rosh Hashanah, even though both parts have to be tithed, and even though we just said that the Torah objectively considers coriander for its seed, we're not going to say it over here. None of it was harvested before Rosh Hashanah. Even over here, says the Brayso, Zara misaser l'sha'avar, and Yarko misaser b'shas l'kitasei isurei. Very good, very good, very good. Number one, number two. Number one, you always can take, in this case, you can always take from the seed for the green for the seed. Number two, how do you determine its year? If some of it was picked before Rosh Hashanah, then we consider all of it seed, meaning when it comes just to the determinant. If none of it was harvested before Rosh Hashanah, then the year will change. And no, you're saying good. If the year will change, then the Truma Gedoyla can go on one on the other, because Truma Gedoyla always has to be taken. But when it comes to the Meiser Sheni, you can never take from one on the other, because one is Meiser Sheni, one is Meiser Ani. There you'll have to separate them. And don't forget that the end number will be the same. It's just, can you go one on the other? And now, I know it's late, but Daf Lamed Zayin, I don't want to have to, we're in the middle of this. Just on the top, and when at least a third came before Rosh Hashanah, but if a third, even the third, the Oinas HaMaisres, which normally is not Negeya, came after Rosh Hashanah, Ben Zara Ben Yarka Misaser Laba. Amazing. In other words, if none of it reached Oinas HaMaisres, normally Oinas HaMaisres has nothing to do with anything, but it will have to do with something. In other words, here we're having a very unique din over here. You want to know, it's a green, it's a seed, how do you count it? If none of it reached Oinas HaMaisres, and don't forget, we are saying that they are going to be considered one plant, to the point that you can be misased from the green. They're connected. So since they're connected, and if none of it reached Oinas HaMaisres before Rosh Hashanah, then the other direction, even though normally we view coriander as a seed, since in this case you have to tithe the green, and none of it reached Oinas HaMaisres, all of it will be determined by the vegetable part of it, which is in the new year laba. Oinas HaMaisres by Kitnius is a shlish. It's amazing.
Yeah.
To be continued.